Okay, thank you. My bar hasn't come up yet. That's it. Thanks very much, Shireen. Okay, welcome to those in attendance at this remote meeting of the local review body of Aberdeen City Council on Tuesday, the 3rd of May 2022. Please note that the meeting will be recorded and published online for public access after the meeting, and we also have external people joining the meeting to observe through Teams. Please note that external people should not switch on their cameras or microphones at any point during the meeting. Can all members leave their cameras on but mute their microphones when not speaking? The microphone should only be switched on when you're invited to speak. As the local review body contains quasi-judicial business, members are reminded that they should not leave the room or meeting during consideration of any application. This meeting has been convened in response to a non-determination of one application. Members of the local review body have before them copies of the review documents as listed in the notice calling the meeting. I will now ask Ms McBain, the Assistant Clerk, to outline the procedure to be followed to conduct this review and to check members are in attendance. Over to yourself, Ms McBain.
Thank you, Convener. So just for the recording, if members just indicate that they're present. So Councillor Bolton.
Present.
Councillor Donnelly.
Present.
And Councillor Mason.
Present.
Thank you. So I'll just quickly run through the procedure now. So members have the procedure note which was circulated with the meeting papers and is intended to set out the wider framework within which the review process operates. From this, it is clear that the first task for the review body is to come to a decision on whether the review documents contain sufficient information for the case to be determined without further procedure, and by that it is meant without further information or representations. To assist, I feel it would be helpful to mention the following. Firstly, that the regulations governing the local review process require that all matters which the applicant intends to raise in the review must be set out in or accompany the notice of review. Secondly, that the focus of the review must be on the basis of what was before the appointed officer when a decision was made, and only in exceptional circumstances will new or additional matters be permitted to be taken into account. Thirdly, to note that the modernisation of the planning system, which included revisal of the planning appeals process, of which this local review body is part, removed the previous right on the part of an applicant to insist on a hearing and replace that with the LRB, providing them with the power to choose a procedure which more accurately reflects the facts and circumstances of the individual case. And lastly, that guidance issued by the Scottish Government's Chief Planner stated that reviews by the LRBs should be conducted by means of full consideration of the application afresh. This review should take the form of a structured discussion led by the Chairperson to consider the matter set out in the notice of review before you, and I would conclude by drawing your attention in particular to points 10 to 12 of the procedure note. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms McBain. Okay, now turning to the consideration of the application in respect of the non-determination of the application for detailed planning permission for the change of use from conversion of offices class 4 to form 16 residential flats, including the removal of the existing link to form separate buildings, various alterations, the formation of parking to the rear and the installation of railings to the front of 31 to 32 Albine Place, Aberdeen. Planning reference 210311. We will now hear from the planning advisor, Ms. Lucy Green, who will provide us with a description of the application proposal. I would again point out Ms. Green attends today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance because she has not been involved in any consideration of the application. Ms. Green will, however, not be asked to express any views on the merits of the proposed development, and in effect, her role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. Ms. Green.
Thank you, Convener. I'll just share my screen.
Okay, it's there. Thank you.
Thank you. So this meeting relates to the request for review against the non-determination of the application for the change of use and conversion from offices to 16 residential flats at 31 to 32 Albine Place. And I'd like to apologise for the need to hold this LRB meeting, which is due to me having included some superseded elevations of the proposals within my presentation at the meeting of the 20th of April. So I'd like to confirm, though, that other than the images on those slides, everything that I said in the presentation was correctly based on the most recently amended scheme and on the case officer's report that reflects that. So without further ado, I'll get on with the presentation and describe the proposal. As previously confirmed, the review has been correctly submitted with all the necessary information within the time limit, and no new matters have been raised in the review submissions. In terms of the procedure, the applicant was happy for the review to proceed on the basis of the information provided. So I'll now provide some background information before handing back to members. So the property consists of a pair of semi-detached traditional granite-built dwellings, and these were later converted and extended for office use. Located within the Albine Place and Rubislaw Conservation Area, the buildings are not listed and they sit on a north-south orientation with a formal frontage to Albine Place and their rear onto Albine Lane, set behind a garden onto Albine Place with a driveway, and the site extends to 2,520 square metres. So that's the aerial location with the property shown in the yellow star. And an image of the front from 2020. So the buildings are 1.5 stories in height on their Albine Place side. The original doors and windows are still present. Metal railings are still present on the stepped access, although not along the street frontage. And there's a large mature beech tree on the frontage covered by tree preservation order. But to the rear, due to levels, the building is 2.5 stories, the frontage building. And there's the large brickwork rendered 3-story structure previously built for and used as an office extension. And this rear structure was originally physically linked to the semi-detached properties, but the 2 links shown on the aerial photo, these 2, have now been removed by the applicant. So the rear office building is accessed from the car park level to the rear at present, which is within the historic curtilages of the properties served from Albine Lane. The building to the east is occupied by Albine Medical Practice, and it has a 2-story extension with blank gable along the side of the site. So you can see that just there. Although 2-story with underbuild, it's just slightly lower than the extension on the application site. And then to the west is a large extension in use as offices, and it has 10 large windows on 2 levels, including looking towards the application site, just along there. In terms of planning history, there's no relevant applications. So turning to the proposal, the 3-story office structure to the rear is proposed for retention, with the interior to be largely removed and the exterior to be reclad in granite, and the link would be removed. Now, these slides just show the extent of demolition. These are the links, and then the roof would be taken off as well. Showing the elevations of the demolition. Those are the links. And then the roof level demolition works. So the traditional property to the front, or 2 properties, are proposed for conversion into 6 flats, 2 on each level, 2 in the basement, 2 on the ground floor, 2 in the first floor. And the ground floor flats would retain the original front stepped access, with the 2 basement and attic flats proposed to be accessed from the side, and new rear stairwell respectively. For the flats on Albine Place, the proposal is to include private amenity space for those flats in the form of either balconies or patios in between the historic property and the rear. So that's showing the south elevation of the Albine Place building with the proposed new stairwell to the rear. The rear structure is proposed to be converted to 10 flats. That's the south elevation of it. 2 flats on the ground floor, 4 flats on each of the first and second floors. And 2 of the flats on each of the first and second floors would have their bedroom and main living spaces facing east or west, directly onto adjacent properties. Balconies would be added to each of the flats to provide private amenity space, and those would vary in size, which we'll see when we look at the floor plans in a minute. The new stairwell on the Albine Place building is approximately 2.3 metres from the rear structure. For the flats in the rear structure, private amenity space is in the form of patios and balconies, largely to the east and west. So I'll just run through the elevations. So that's the north elevation of the rear building, showing proposals for a living wall there. And you can just see at the side the balconies. And that's the property on the adjacent site. And that's the frontage onto Albine Place. This is just showing the flats within the Albine Place building. So there'd be 1 flat each side within each building. That's the lower ground floor. Ground floor again, 1 flat and 1 flat. And then the first floor again, 1 flat on each side. This is moving on to the floor plans for the rear building. So that's the lowest level, where there would be 1 flat on each side of the building. And then this is below ground level at the north end of the building. First floor, 2 of the flats would be in the northern portion of the building, and then these 2, which would have their sitting rooms on the south elevation. And similar on the second floor, there'd be 2 flats towards the north end of the building and 2 the south. And that's the proposed roof. So the roof would be replaced in the same profile as existing, and the plans indicate that the tiles would be removed and slates would be used on the sloping sides of the roof. And that's showing the elevation from Albine Lane. Again, from the lane, just showing the access into the site. Cross sections through the Albine Place building, showing the new stairwell to the rear. And cross sections through the site just taken at different points, showing the relationship of the 2 buildings. That's Albine Place and Albine Lane at this end. And again, looking from the west. These sections through the rear extension. So this is taken sort of lengthways, north-south through the site with the entrance on this side. And a section through the other way, east-west, showing the balconies on each side of the building. And the block plan. So to the rear there would be 13 parking spaces with a further 3 informal spaces available on the Albine Place frontage. And there are no changes proposed to the ingress and egress to the front, and the entrance to the rear is also as per the existing situation. The site would also provide bike storage and bin storage as well. And these would be located within the parking court and the rear structure. So located within the parking court and the rear structure would be a communal area of amenity measuring 200 square metres. And there would also be some areas of planted flower and shrub beds on the edges of the property. That's showing the proposed railings along the street frontage of the Albine Place property. Existing and proposed views. So the Albine Place frontage showing just the driveway sweeping around. And these are our existing and proposed views showing the rear extension and the Albine Place property there. It's just indicating the changes to the roof and the removal of the link building. Again from Albine Lane. So turning to consultations, the waste team noted the bin requirements for the proposed development. The developer obligations team requested contributions towards core paths, healthcare, open space and community facilities, and noted that the proposal is within the affordable housing waiver zone. The environment policy team commented on a tree survey that was submitted for the tree to the front of the property. And since then, amendments have been made which removed parking from that area. So the roads team had no objection to the proposal. They were happy with the level of parking, however noted that a disabled space would be required to be added. And Queen's Cross and Harlaw Community Council made positive comments, as we noted previously. There were 2 letters of support from the same person raising various issues, the mix of uses that happily exist within the area, that they found the design to be sympathetic, parking was being sufficient, that the amendments improved the scheme, and that the existing building was ugly and would be improved through the scheme, and that they had no concerns about construction work. So the applicant's case for review set out in the notice of review and statement, and the following central points were made. That amendments had been made to the scheme in response to the case officer's comments that the proposal would bring back into use vacant buildings, and that redevelopment of the whole site was necessary in order to deliver the works, that the proposal contributes to the aim of raising the city centre population, that vacant offices have been marketed for some time, and that the proposal is a response to the economic climate that exists at the moment. They commented that the proposal would see the traditional building restored, and that residential use has been confirmed as acceptable in principle. That the site contains an existing substantial modern extension. It's visible only from the rear, and it would be reclad in granite to improve its appearance. They commented that the link building would be removed and the staircase replaced with an extension to the rear of the frontage building, and that's been amended to make it more transparent. They also made the point that a new garden area, landscaping, car and bike parking and bin storage would be provided. Further points were that concerns that had been noted in terms of level of amenity for future residents and the impact on the conservation area, and that they'd been addressed through the amendments. In terms of amenity, they stated that all flats would have external space, be dual aspect and have windows looking onto the landscaping, and most would have south-facing windows. Further commented that this is a city centre location and amenity should be judged accordingly. That the opaque windows to the north, that's within the rear extension, would protect the privacy of neighbours within the Albine Place building. That the sun studies show that all flats would have some direct sunlight and that there had been no objections. So I'll now hand back to you, convener.
Thanks very much, Ms Green. Members, we now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take a decision on the application. The agent has indicated that no further procedure is required before determination is made. Members, remember, if you do not feel you have enough information to take a decision, you can request that a site visit be undertaken, that further written information be provided, or that a hearing be arranged. Councillor Donnelly?
I'm happy to proceed. I know the area very well, so.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mason?
Happy to proceed.
Yeah, and as am I. Again, I'm very familiar with the area. So with that in mind, I will ask Ms Green if she could now go through get my words out today. So now that we have sufficient information, decision taken, I will now ask Ms Green to go through the relevant policies and other considerations as per the procedure.
Thank you. So in terms of policies, looking at the Local Development Plan 2017, the site lies within the area zoned under Policy B3, West End offices, and this principally supports offices whilst residential use is to be considered on merit. So for that reason, Policy H1, residential areas, is relevant in considering the quality of the proposal for residential use. And if the criteria within the policy are met, then residential use would be acceptable in principle. So the policy has various criteria within it, and the first one is whether the proposal would constitute overdevelopment. Secondly is the consideration of impact on the character and amenity of the surrounding area. Would there be loss of open space? So there's no public open space affected in this proposal. And the last one, does it comply with supplementary guidance? So in terms of that, it should be noted that the proposed building is 12 metres from the building to the west and approximately 4.5 from the building to the east, which is the blank gable of the medical practice. Policy H1 also raises matters of privacy and amenity for the future occupiers. Sunlight and daylight, these would be considered under Policy H1, and consideration given to the proximity of the adjacent buildings as well as their relationship of the two buildings on site. And a sunlight study was submitted for the Albine Place properties, showing that all rooms would receive sunlight, and that study covered March, June and September, but not the winter period, September to March. The policy on amenity in the proposed plan, that also states that no more than 50% of the usable amenity space should be used for car parking. And that development will be designed to ensure that occupiers are afforded adequate levels of amenity in relation to daylight, sunlight, noise, air quality and immediate outlook. And it also goes on to state that residential development will also ensure minimal shading of existing private and public spaces and ensure that occupiers are afforded adequate levels of privacy. Turning to policy D1, design, members will be familiar with the requirement for a high standard of design and the 6 essential qualities that are listed there.
You're not your slides haven't moved on. See, there.
That's
it.
Policy D4 on the historic environment, which states that the council will protect, preserve and enhance the historic environment in line with national and local policy and guidance. And it offers for support for high quality design that respects the character, appearance and setting of the historic environment, the conservation area in this case. And so this policy is relevant in terms of the retention of the rear extension. Other relevant policies for consideration, landscape, whereby developments should have a strong landscape framework. There's the technical advice note on materials, which considers the use of granite, and also the advice note on development along lanes. Also, in terms of replacing the railings along the Albine Place street frontage, there's technical advice note on the repair and reinstatement of railings, which advises that they should be sort of faithful copies of the original railings. Policy D5 seeks the retention and reuse of all granite buildings and features. Policy T2 covers managing the transport impact of development and links in terms of walking and public transport. Again, policy T3 on sustainable and active travel encourages developments to be accessible by a range of transport modes. Policy R6 covers requirements for waste storage on the site. And Scottish planning policy advises protecting, enhancing and promoting access to cultural heritage, including the historic environment, with proposals in conservation areas, preserving or enhancing the character and appearance of the conservation area. So the proposal obviously lies within the Albine and Rubislaw conservation area, and it's within area B, which describes the area as development as a set of high quality houses set within their own large back gardens. So that was how the site would originally have been. And finally, points for consideration. In terms of zoning, does the proposal comply with policy B3, which states that residential proposals are considered on merit? So we then turn to policy H1 and the criteria within that. Does the proposal preserve and enhance the conservation area? Is it of sufficient design quality, having regard to the factors such as scale, siting, footprint, etc.? And does the proposal consist of sustainable development? Overall, does it comply with the development plan when considered as a whole, or are there material considerations that outweigh that? Okay, thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Green. Could I just get you to bring up the slide that had D1 on it, because we didn't actually, it was only briefly mentioned, and then I had said the slides weren't moving on. It's just so that just so we can see what the policies, that's it. So okay, so let members see that slide. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you, Ms. Green. Okay, so members, do we have questions for Ms. Green? Councillor Mason first.
Yes, my question at the moment is just clarification. On the floor layouts, there are red ellipses in various places. What's that mean?
It probably means different things. I think it's where amendments have taken place to the scheme, though. Let me just go back to the floor layouts.
There's various places where red shading is square, but there's also various ellipses around the place, mainly in living areas.
Oh, I think it's to do with disabled access, actually. Just let me go back to the slide. Right, so these,
Yes.
yeah. I think it's showing areas where wheelchairs could turn.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions, Councillor Mason?
No, I mean I'm conscious of the status of the previous meeting is null and void, incomplete in total. Is that right?
Sorry, say that again.
The meeting we had before is totally null and void.
Yeah,
that
Mr.
correct?
Thompson, do you want to just come in and say anything around that?
Yes, thank you, Councillor, Convener. Yes, that's correct. Yeah, the previous decision is null and void. We just have to strike that decision and start afresh today,
Yeah,
basically.
okay. So I need to repeat it if necessary. We have to repeat comments. Yeah.
I'm afraid so. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. No, I think I've got all the questions. It's a very comprehensive report. So.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Donnelly?
Thank you, Convener. Just a few thoughts going through my mind on the high quality of design and the heritage issues and the conservation area. So the office block itself was built in the peak of oil and gas, what, 1990s, 1980s, 1990s? Was Ruberslow Albion in a conservation? Did we establish conservation areas then? Were they up and running? Or I know around Ferryhill, the north part of Ferryhill. What I'm kind of getting at was we're making much of a, in the report, a concern over architectural significance, and I'm just wondering, with this proposed granite cladding, is that a new? Did I hear that on the 20th? I know the 20th is null and joy. The 20th of April. Was granite cladding mentioned then?
Yeah,
it was. Okay. Amenities. I take it from the so we don't know about the establishment of the conservation area. Ms. Green, no. What I'm saying is that we had an office block building there that didn't tone in the 1980s or 90s, and we're now kind of wanting to preserve it or take it, on board.
The conservation areas were established at different times.
That one said 2013, I think, actually, because I did note that from the report.
Now, I take it amenities. I mean, my concern was south-facing windows, and we now have some sitting rooms facing east and west, and light issues. But the car park at the amenity space at the back was a former office block car park of 36 cars, now removed for a 10-car space, a 13-car space at the rear and 3 at the front. So the amenity area with the grassed area was the former car park that housed a lot more cars when it was used as an office. So am I taking that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Just to make balance amenity, that's all I'm trying to do here. The public transport issues, well, it's a city centre location. I mean, you know, you can easily get to the railway stations. But I have another concern. Dates wrong. Okay. So we still have the report still has concerns about light in the basement, but you're now saying in the amended that would be pertaining to the winter months and not the March, June, September. Is that when I take it from you? You're saying that there will be sufficient light 6 months a year, but not, because you described the basement flats as dungeons in one. But did I describe them as dungeons? Or a little late, which kind of suggested.
Yeah,
So we still have light issues with the
those light
timing
issues
of that.
are,
You said that was timed in for September and the 20th of
Councillor
April.
Donnelly, maybe let Ms Green answer your question.
Okay.
the report reflects the sunlight studies which were done for March, June and September. So that's no change from the previous meeting. The report reflected that situation, which is what we talked about at the last meeting. So between September and March, there isn't a sun study showing that time period. But what they show in the sun studies that we've got is that sunlight will reach all the units. So that might be for, just a limited time during the day. But some point during the day, sunlight would reach all the units.
Okay, thank you, Ms.
That hasn't changed from the, what we talked about at the previous meeting.
I just thought there was a concern that it taken place in the winter months, September, and it excluded March, April, which we now have that, March, June, which we now have that in front of us, which would indicate that there would be light. Well, naturally, in all our houses, and it gets dark in the winter at 3:30 anyway.
I think
okay, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah. I hear what you're saying. No, there's an amendment to that or clarification of that from the 20th of April meeting on the light issue.
The only thing that's changed is that I put that previously the sunlight study wasn't in a form that we could put online. So I've put it online, but it was reflected within the case officer's report. That study is reflected within the report.
Okay.
So it hasn't changed. In other words, Councillor Donnelly just wasn't online. That was all.
Sunlight study, okay.
Okay. Oh, Councillor Mason stood up. I'll just wait for him to reappear. He's back. I was just waiting for you to come back, Councillor Mason.
My apologies for that. I had the telephone go off and then start whistling at me.
That's okay, don't worry, no problem, nothing was said. Okay, members, if there's no further questions, I don't have any. As I say, I think there's adequate information in the report and also from Ms Green and your own questioning members. So in accordance with the procedure note circulated, the local review body will now discuss and decide the manner in which to review the reviews to proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to the case have been considered and taken into account. Councillor Mason, I'll kick off with you in terms of if you'd like to.
Yes, yes, I'm conscious that this is a first conversion in that area to residential from offices, and it is the most difficult situation, and if we have to get this one right, because that will determine what goes on for, well, I'm sure will be more along that particular section. And I think it's right that we're trying to preserve the frontage onto Albine Place. As said in the report, it's historically and culturally, environmentally one of the success stories of Aberdeen, if you like. And that's what one knows about Aberdeen generally. And having lived around in the West End since I moved to Aberdeen 45 years ago, it is a gem that needs to be kept. But, however, that doesn't mean to say the back has to be necessarily follow the same pattern. But what it seems to me that this project seems to be trying to get too many flats jammed in on with a building which is so the back building which is simply ill-designed for the flats. and in fact, the problem is it's a new extension building there. It's in the wrong place and the wrong shape, and probably the wrong material as well. And trying to do something with that is incredibly difficult. Almost all the flats have only limited daylight and amenity, and do overlook other flats, and the privacy is not complete as required by the various guidance notes we have on amenity. That's not to say I necessarily agree that the amenity rules are as they should be. I mean, that I think is, the city needs discussion as to what needs to be done in order to accommodate conversion. So forward, I think there's a problem. But certainly this is not the way this is being done is not going to resolve the problem. And I'm not sure whether the flats will be very upmarket or very downmarket. They're certainly very small, and I mean there are 28 beds on the site, and if assuming there are at least 2 people per bed, I mean that's an awful lot of people. Since they're double beds, but even if they're not, even if it's 1 or 2 are single, there's still a lot of people, and on site, and with very little amenity, very little open space, and certainly would not attract families in any way. It would be young couples, presumably, in a transition, so they would not be permanent into the city. There'd be a transitional group of people. I would suspect. By one means or another, so the churn of flats there would be quite high. So not conducive to long-term residential accommodation, inappropriate building and layout, and too many people, too dense, and the materials being used, if you like, a bit of a concession to the environment, and not integrated into the environment as well. So on that basis, I think we should uphold the officer's decision to refuse this application.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Donnelly.
Thank you, Madam Convener. Well, today's presentation has kind of swayed me thinking it's more favourable towards the appellant, the applicant. The concerns on the heritage bit, you know, when we've had an extension built in the 80s. I mean, my main concern was the previous meeting was the light issue and cramming it or jamming, as Councillor Mason said, too much into one development. However, on amenities, I was kind of taking the fact about this community garden at the back, even though light in the front or light in the east and west windows and their sitting room would be still subject to, you know, seasonal moods, seasonal weather. I also feel that, you know, we do have a policy, the council, of encouraging city centre living. So we're talking about moving people into the city centre, particularly above the flats in Union Street. Setting a precedence, well, I feel also there's an economic issue here as well. It worries me to think that if we don't, you know, there's been a big cultural change in offices because of the COVID-19 and the downturn in oil and gas. On the president's side, I have worries that the offices further could end up being empty, derelict for a number of times. I think the applicant said this had been on the market for a number of years. So I'd certainly like to see it back brought into economic use. You know, it's nothing worse than rundown places in the city, which is happening in Union Street, where the shops closed with COVID. And, you know, we did have a west end of office block policy years ago at the peak of oil and gas, but things have changed since then. On the public transport issues, you know, and also on the density of people. I mean, there would have been far more people working there, to Councillor Mason, when it was an office than what it is residential. I mean, they've got rid of about 20 car parking spaces that would have been used for office workers walking about the place, you know, 5 days a week, 9 till 5 or whatever. They'll no longer be there. The residents will be there. So, and I also feel this architectural significance that we're kind of hammering home a bit as well. I mean, we have already a building, as I say, built, and this granite cladding might help with tone in. So as I say, the 16 flats, I'm prepared on this stage to go with the applicant and overturn the officer's decision, because I think today's presentation has been more positive towards them than what it was on the 20th of April, if that is taken on board.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Donnelly. Thank you, Ms Green, for going through the relevant policies. You know, I think the scheme clearly has certain merits, but I think I would tend to be siding with Councillor Mason on this. I think the amenity for the residents that will move in there will not be a quality amenity space. I think the lack of light at different times of the year will be detrimental to the well-being of the intended residents. I know that we can't get it perfect, but when you're looking at 12 metres and 4.5 metres between buildings, that gives me cause for concern. I mean, I absolutely 100% support residential in this area. I have no problem with it being residential, but I think we have to get the right residential development, because I think our lanes have been an area of contention and how we treat them. And I think, you know, Councillor Donnelly, your point that we put this building up back in the, whether it was 80s, 90s, I'm not sure exactly of its origins, but it was to serve a purpose in a very dynamic time that we were under pressure for office space. But I think we have the opportunity. We do want to encourage city centre living. I don't think there's a problem with the transport links. I think it ticks all the boxes there. But, you know, and I think that the applicant has tried to, again, demonstrate an understanding of the conservation area by the sensitive way in which it's treated the existing, as in the heritage building, as opposed to the extension. I think adding the granite has obviously improved it. But I have serious concerns when the main windows are, or a lot of the windows are looking out into either a blank wall or into another office building. I just don't think there's sufficient space between it. It's a bit like, you know, trying to put lipstick on a pig, I'm afraid, to be brutally honest. I just don't think it lends itself to the purpose of residential living. And I hear what you say, Councillor Donnelly, about, you know, that there used to be X amount of office workers there. It's not, for me, necessarily the amount of people living there. It's purely about the quality of design in terms of its suitability. And, you know, I'm not sure how you deal with that existing building. And does it need something more drastic? Well, we're here to consider the application that's before us. And if I can find ways to make things work, I always do. But for me, this is just a stretch too far. And I think, Councillor Mason, you were correct in saying that, you know, this sets a benchmark for other applications that I hope come in. You know, and I think it's important to say to the applicant that, you know, certainly my desires would be, and I know that there was meant to be, we had an update at the PDMC, that the affordable waiver will continue for a period of time. So that option for the applicant will still exist if they come in with a modified application. So, you know, there are a number of options, I think, still available for this site. But unfortunately, I just can't see how this would give a good amenity to the residents that are going to live in it. I think, you know, what they're proposing with the granite and everything else will make the building look prettier than it does, but it still, for me, doesn't work because of the proximity to the existing buildings on either side. It's just too close. And I think for the house at the front, you know, it's basically going to have a small void between it and the building, and you can speak about living walls and you can put various things, but at the end of the day, it will still create almost like an alley at the back rather than an amenity area. So for all of those reasons, I know this was a non-determination of the application, which is before us. I would support the findings in the report by the officer, and, you know, with a heavy heart, refuse this application. on all of those grounds and discounts the planning, you know, D1, D2. I don't think we've got a problem, as I say, with any of the transport ones or the refuge ones. I think they're okay. And B3, yes, there's a slight sort of tension with, but again, I think residential, we heard, would be considered on its own merits. And, you know, I'm quite comfortable that residential could work here with the right application. So, you know, that one, you know, if we look at it in its own merits at the moment, it doesn't stack up for me. So I would be siding with Councillor Mason on this one, and that would be to refuse the application. Ms McBain, do you require to take a roll call for it, or?
No, that's fine. So I just took a note that by majority members have voted to refuse the application.
Yeah, okay.
And to use the reasons that were listed in the draft report by the planning officer.
Okay, thank you. Right, members, thank you very much for attending today. I know it was a bit of a rerun of the previous application with the additional information in front of us, so we could consider the application afresh, and I think we've done that. Councillor Donnelly, I know that you're moving on to pastures new. I'd just like to thank you for all the efforts that you've put into attending LRBs and planning in the past, and the same to yourself, Councillor Mason. I know that you're going to have more of a leisure time, hopefully, and it's been an amazing journey watching you come onto the LRB and your, I suppose, grasp and learning of the planning procedures in a very short time. So thank you very much for volunteering on a quite a regular basis. I think everybody needs to step up, and you certainly have on that. And thank you to all the officers. Once again, thanks, Lucy. Not sure what's going to happen after Friday, but it's been a pleasure whatever happens. So thank you all very much today.
All the best for Thursday anyway, whatever happens. So
Thank you very much.
politics, you know, it's ups and downs. It's
Okay.
like all the best.
Well,
Tom.
can I